Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining Taylor Root's webinar today. I am really excited to launch a session. We will give a minute for everyone to log on, and in the meantime, I'll give a little bit of an overview of Taylor Root. We're a legal search and recruitment firm. I am a partner here. I lead our corporate and commercial in-house team, and I am joined by Georgie Miller, who specialises in the junior to mid-level in-house market. And we are really delighted to be hosting this session today. We want to be able to provide insights both around making the move in-house and then actually how to advance your career. We'll just wait for a few more people to log on. I can see the numbers are going up, and we'll just give them another 30 seconds and then we'll introduce the panel. Great. I still see people joining, but I will introduce our panel. So really delighted to have some highly experienced lawyers with varied backgrounds with us today. Kandop Thacker, Head of Legal at Uber UK. Kandop started his background actually as a real estate lawyer at Baker McKenzie, and is going to be talking through how he's navigated his career to being the lead of the legal team in the UK for one of the largest tech companies globally. Emma Lilly trained in-house, and she's going to be offering insights into alternative training groups and how she's actually advanced her career to head of legal at SD Works, a HR training provider. And finally, we have Lisa Ng. Lisa started her private practice career as a corporate lawyer, spent many years at some top-tier law firms, making her first move in-house as a senior legal counsel to gaming company Miniclip, and recently has taken on the general counsel position at Outright Games. So congratulations, Lisa, on your new move and promotion to general counsel. I've actually known Lisa for many years. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a message from a friend with a screenshot of an Instagram reel. And the message said, "Are you hosting the Lisa Ng?" So it turns out Lisa is not only a high-flying lawyer and mother of two, she's also an Instagram influencer. So please check her out if you haven't already. See, not all lawyers are boring. So let's start with a poll, just to, whilst everyone's logging on, I'd love to know who we have in the audience today, whether you are already in private practice or in-house. If you could just vote, and then we'll share the results so our panelists know kind of who we've got on the call in terms of the demographic. And in the meantime, I'd just love to encourage you, please, to use the Q&A function throughout the session. Our panelists are very happy to answer questions you've got, and we just really want to make this interactive. So we'll share the results now of the poll. Hopefully that will be up on your screen. So I can see we've got certainly more private practice, so 54% in private practice, and 35% of you are in-house, 11% other. So I'm very intrigued to know what that could be. But let's move on to the question. So let's start, Kandop. What are the key differences you found between working in a law firm and being in-house?
So firstly, thank you for having me on this panel. The key differences are really, in my view, that in-house lawyers are not just lawyers, they're business people with legal skills. And the fundamental difference is that you're part of a growing commercial business. You're an integral part of that business, which means that you see matters from beginning to end on everything you're involved in. And in addition, the pace of advice that you're required to provide. As you can imagine, Uber moves very rapidly, and the pace of advice that we're required to provide to the business is also fairly rapid. I feel that the role of the in-house lawyer, definitely over the last few years, has definitely become increasingly multifaceted. The ability of telling the business of what it should do rather than what it can do. And also you're not handling legal issues in a vacuum. You're a critical part of a much more complicated commercial matrix. This means that you may embrace a range of new skills that you may not have previously dealt with. So, for example, handling policy issues, comms, understanding the political environment, dealing with the media, watching consumer impact, and being forward thinking about regulation and risk, the constant threat of litigation down the road in the many forms that it potentially may take. You're also working with incredibly bright, talented individuals who are looking at legal issues from a very different perspective, which is not only challenging, but also can be quite refreshing. The distinction I would draw out is that in private practice, you may be providing very discreet legal advice and called upon when needed. And you're also fairly insulated as a junior lawyer. You may have a senior associate and a partner between you and the client. In-house, the client just comes to your desk and asks for your opinion on a variety of matters. Some of the biggest projects I've been involved in have kicked off by someone coming up to me, be it over a coffee or up to me wherever I'm sitting, saying, "Hey, Kandab, can I have a quick word?" For example, looking to increase EV adoption by drivers as a result of ULIS coming into effect, and thinking about this. What do you think?
Yeah, so really having to think on your feet, and obviously really understand your company and the broader kind of aspects that are going on. What would be kind of your advice for junior lawyers in terms of adapting to those differences when they move from private practice to in-house?
Don't be afraid to say you need to consider issues. As I've said, we move at an incredible pace, and the business has these expectations that are for instantaneous responses, which simply may not be possible. Really get to understand the business, and don't be afraid to ask your colleagues and business colleagues as well. We have a whole deck just full of acronyms that we use, that the business uses, and and we have a fairly steep learning curve. So experience is invaluable, especially in a sort of a fairly matrix organization like ourselves. And fake it until you make it.
I love that. Lisa, you're nodding, so let's come to you. Again, you've been in private practice and in-house, so we'd love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Totally echo you, Kandab. And also thanks for that very embarrassing introduction on from you, Georgia. That was not I was not aware of that. Anyway,
your followers will be going up.
Yeah. So I mean, actually, I think that it's two totally different jobs. Actually, being in private practice, being in-house, completely different. One of them, like as Kandab said, one of them insulated. You're very specific on one specific issue, whether it's employment, regulatory, et cetera, et cetera. So you are so focused on solving that issue. Whereas in-house, totally that same point. Yeah, you're absolutely the business part of the business core. Your job is to look at the risks and try to mitigate them. You are so trying to understand the business as a whole. And sometimes if you don't know the industry, you're trying to understand the industry. So I work in gaming, and I'm not a gamer, but yet I came into this gaming business trying to, same thing, acronym lists, trying to understand what people want out of it. Ultimately, what is the goal? And that, I think, also changes your perspective a lot. If you go into a business as a startup, that is going to be very different from going into like an Uber, for example, or from for example, a bank. Like, can you imagine having a bank, red tape in a bank versus a startup, which is probably much more, sole legal accounts of which you're all hands on deck for every which thing. So I say it is, number one, very industry dependent. Number two, very stage dependent. The phase of the business. Are you PE backed? Are you VC? Or what kind of like funding are you? There's so many different issues, or not issues, but so many different variables that impact who you will be within that business. And then again, as an external counsel, when I reach out to external counsel, it is all about sort of a specific issue. So you are, like Kandab said, very isolated in that particular issue. But whereas here, I mean, I'm going to preach, obviously, but whereas here inside the business, you're part of a business, right? You all have an objective. You're trying to get to that amazing objective, hopefully, whatever it is. Is it IPO? Is it exit? Is it whatever it is? You're part of this journey. And that is, to me, so fulfilling. And that's to me, the best part about being in-house.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Lisa. Emma, let's come to you. And obviously, you trained not in private practice, so not the traditional routes. Would love you just to share a little bit about that journey training in-house and some of the challenges that you've seen for in-house lawyers at that level.
Of course, Georgia, thank you. And again, I'm excited to be here as well, especially amongst some great panelists. So thank you so much for having me today. My journey, as you say, non-traditional. I was the first trainee that my company had trained. I went in as paralegal, in-house paralegal, and made it quite clear in the interview that I wanted to qualify. So there's kind of a gap there for you to fill, employer. But we had a conversation about it, and thankfully managed to turn it into a training contract. Got 6 months time to count, which is something that I'll come back to in a moment. Did an 18 months training contract in-house and then went straight into an NQ role. So bit of a different route. Only had 3 months in private practice myself, which was part of my training. And for me, just confirmed that that's not what I wanted to do. Everyone's different, right? But it was just more of a confirmation rather than a let's see where this goes. But back to the 6 months time to count thing, I was always told that by going in as paralegal, you're wasting time, you know, you just want to get trained and go ahead, especially if you want to become qualified as soon as possible. But it transpired that that experience was actually really, really helpful. So I guess one of the first differences that I would say, or a bit of advice to give, is that you have to think a little bit differently if you're going to train in-house, be a bit more creative. Of course, you've got to put yourself out there with what you want and expect in terms of that training. We all have to reach the same bar by the SRA. It's just that businesses and law firms go about it a little bit differently. So yeah, don't worry about timings. Don't try and match up to those set levels or stages that you would have if you were looking at private practice. It is different in-house, but it will all work out in the end. So I guess that's kind of the tips wrapped into the journey that I had in the early days, Georgia.
That's great, thank you. And we've actually got a question from Naomi around training. So she says that she's currently on a commercial client secondment, but unsure whether she'll be able to qualify into a commercial team. So how important is it to have that commercial experience when making the move in-house? Now, Kandop, you had a real estate background. Lisa, you were corporate. Do either of you want to take that question?
From my perspective, we always look at whether a candidate has had secondments. I think it's one invaluable experience for that particular individual, but also it can really crystallize in their own mind whether an in-house move is something that would actually be something that they would like to do going forward further in their career. There are a lot of advantages to being in-house, but there is also some definite disadvantages, and it's definitely not for everyone.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think, but I do think that if you're qualifying, sorry, I can't remember. Did she say that she was currently in qualifying, or she's in a secondment? Yeah, it depends. I guess I think where you are as well in your career, right? If you're kind of on the more junior end and looking to make a move in-house, yeah, it would help you, but equally you're quite malleable at that age, at that level. So being kind of junior, you could always go into an interview and say, hey, look, I didn't do a commercial. I'm not in commercial at the moment. I might not be qualified in it, but look, I've done X, Y, and Z on the secondment, which means that lends itself to having an introduction. I know that I like it. I know that this is what I want to do, but I just need an opportunity to be able to do that, and give me the opportunity here, because then I'll be able to excel those skills in a way that suits you and suits the business, and I can make myself adaptable to your needs as the business. So I think there's always a way to frame it to make sure your experience reflects where you want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. And that actually leads quite nicely into that kind of interview preparation and making those applications to move in-house. So why don't we come to Georgie? And really, Georgie, could you give us a bit of an idea of what the market is actually currently like for lawyers looking to make that move in-house?
Yeah, definitely. We're really seeing an increase in the number of roles at the junior level, so sort of from NQ to about 3 PQE. And I think that that's on both the client side in terms of them wanting junior lawyers and the candidate side in terms of there being increasing demand for people wanting to move in-house. I would say that obviously September and March tend to be the busiest times for the NQ roles, obviously to align with the qualification periods. So yeah, we definitely had a number of people securing really exciting new roles with the September time, and definitely already in conversations with clients about when they're going to launch those March roles as well for those people. And I would say that we're also seeing an increase in the variety of skill set that clients are looking for. So traditionally, we used to see a lot of just pure commercial contract roles, but we're now seeing actually increasing demand for sort of more specialist stuff like IP, employment, corporate, real estate. So yeah, I think it's a really positive time for the junior market, and good options out there.
That's great, thank you. Kandop, you've conducted a lot of hiring during your career, and I know Uber has a very high bar. So perhaps you could share some thoughts around kind of what you look for in candidates to help people kind of think about how they're preparing.
Sure. So a couple of things that we look for in candidates. I think the first one is resilience. You know, we operate within fairly small teams. We are a fairly dynamic organization, and we work at pace, and there's a huge amount of volume. So there's a certain amount of resilience required from each of the team members. There's also a requirement, again, because we're not a massive team, for self-starting and the ability to really take ownership of the matter if the business is coming to you with a particular issue, and take ownership from a perspective of whilst it may not be your speciality, or may not be it may not be something that you're able to immediately advise on, go away and actually find the necessary resources to be able to advise on that particular issue. So really taking ownership and driving that matter forward. Confidence, incredibly important, especially in front of the business, and sort of the willingness to go and find the answer to a difficult legal question. You know, we are posed by so many issues internally from the business, and some of them may be fairly straightforward, but some of them are fairly difficult and very nuanced, and in particular leaning on our sort of business strategy. Then having sort of a commercial mindset, being optimistic, incredibly important. Also being a real team player. You know, we have a fairly tightly knit legal team, and we all operate within that team, which is part of a wider global EMEA team and global team as well. Ruthless, and I say that from a perspective of
what do you mean by that?
From triaging issues, so being really ruthless with regard to what is actually a priority to the business, as opposed to what is a priority, you know, because someone just come to you and asked you that particular question. So that becomes really important as well, because of the volume. I think the two final points are being able to deal with the volume work that comes through, and also willing to take a pay cut.
Oh, we could definitely come on to that. Lisa, what are your thoughts on that kind of quite a heavy list, I think quite a long list from Kandop, those expectations, but I do understand it's really looking at that kind of that high volume you're getting is quite a range, so really knowing how to prioritize and actually know where to go and find the answer. So you're not going to know everything, but you need to be able to have that mindset to be able to go and work it out by the sounds of it. What else would you add, Lisa, to that in terms of what you're looking for?
Mine is probably a much shorter list, but enthusiasm is probably my number one key. And I think Kandop touched on it earlier, but confidence and enthusiasm is just, it goes so far, especially when it comes to being more on the more junior end. So if you are going in, because if you're more senior, you kind of you have a very specific expertise in which you are lending yourself to whatever business you're interviewing for. But when you're more junior, it's sort of you're ripe and you're willing and you're almost like a sponge, ripe for information. So why don't you utilize that to your advantage by saying that actually I am here here. I'm ready to learn. And this is, I really want to just, you know, I know it's an overused phrase, but I want to get stuck in and I really want to learn about this business, what you do. The more you know, the more context you get, the more questions that you ask and get answers to, the more you will understand what is driving this business, why they even need you to begin with, and how you're going to get from point A to point B, and whatever that objective is. I keep going back to this, but whatever the objective is of that business and whatever they want to do with the business ultimately, how can you add your set of values to that part to get to there, to get to that goal? And I think that sort of enthusiasm comes up and time again, and I will always choose enthusiasm for the role over a degree in X or, you know, going to this school or whatever it is. Those are important, don't get me wrong, but this is ultimately, you'll get much further with somebody who wants to be there than someone who doesn't.
Absolutely. So hiring really for that kind of aptitude and attitude. How do you think people can get their motivations across if they're in private practice and they're looking to move in-house? How do you think they should be kind of showing, you know, their enthusiasm for that and why they want to move?
For me, it's super simple. Like, I mean, you are interviewing for a role likely in an industry, right? There is something that you're doing. So for me, it's gaming. So if you are coming to an interview with me and you know nothing about anything to do with gaming, you've not read a single you know, article on, I don't know, what's happened in the gaming world, or even what gaming is really, is it video gaming, is it gambling, what, you know, then that to me shows that, okay, well, you're just trying to get a job, and that's all well and good. There's a place and time for that. But for me, I want somebody on my team that actually, you don't have to be a gamer, but sure, you want to understand what, you know, COVID happened and everybody was at home during that time. So what happened, do you think, in terms of the COVID bump when it comes to entertainment at home will be very different from Candarb, right? Because will people at Uber be going out during COVID? Probably not. So what happens in the industry, in the market, that reflects on the business during that time? In gaming, it was because everybody was at home, so bumper years during that time. And you can imagine, so what's happened after that? These are all things that we can discuss. Let's have a chat. And when it comes to me understanding the motivations behind that particular candidate, it has to be that you are interested in what we're doing. And that ultimately, I think, plays such a big role in getting the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, what are your thoughts and tips for people in terms of being able to show that enthusiasm and really incorporate that they have done research and they understand kind of something about the corporate, something about the industry? What would your advice be?
Yeah, so I first of all started to work for a fuel card company. I didn't have any clue, or probably, if I'm being honest, an interest in fuel cards when I started there. Then moved to aviation, Manchester Airports Group, and now I'm in payroll. The only reason I explain that is because of how different they are, but also at every point I've had to show some level of willing at each stage of that industry that I had zero experience with to be able to get a job there and work in legal. And it's all about we spoke about the willingness to learn, the enthusiasm, but the link to the legal work as well. One of the questions that I asked in an interview, which was, you know, my ex-manager, I saw them recently and they mentioned it because they'd remembered it from that time, was about the T's and C's that were on the website of the airport. And I went through them and there was something like public T's and C's, something about engagement with suppliers. So I was asking about that in the aviation context, but also saying how much work does this create for us as a legal team? And, you know, what would my involvement in that be? So not only are you showing that you're interested, you've done your research and that, you know, you're linking it to aviation, you've looked at that legal side to it. So I didn't have to know about, you know, anything to do with the enforceability of them or any legal technical knowledge, but it showed that I'd looked into it, applied it to the industry, where the difficulties might be on a common sense basis, really, but then linked it to my role that I was enthusiastic about, I was interested in making an impact within. So I think that's a really, really good way of doing it, a practical way.
Yeah, I love
questions based upon your research, and then you kind of get that, oh yeah, not only have you done that, but you're interested in making an impact here.
Yeah, definitely. Georgie, from your experience as a recruiter, any advice you'd give or any examples of really good preparation or very bad answers to interview questions?
I mean, I think it's definitely a point that we see people fall down on time and time again is, you know, having, explaining their motivations for moving in-house really well, but then when someone actually digs a bit deeper, not being able to actually demonstrate research into the industry or the specific company, or maybe more generally that, you know, they've had a look at the website and they've read the top 3 press releases that are on there and they're really interested in them, but it's something that happened a year or so ago that was a major event for the business they weren't as confident on. So I definitely think it's a big thing that we see. And actually, within the interview process, when people meet stakeholders, that really tends to materialize if people haven't done the sufficient level of research into the business and don't show that enthusiasm, because, you know, the stakeholders are super passionate about that. But I mean, for example, if you were going to interview for a retail business or e-commerce, you can't just go and say that you love fashion and you love clothes. You need to dig much deeper into, you know, what their company's actually like and the sort of fibers of the business. And yeah, just going deeper than looking at LinkedIn and the website. And I think, as Emma said, you know, definitely asking lots of questions about your role and how it will change over time, and demonstrating a long-term interest in business growth and what their future plans are as well.
We have got 2 questions submitted around interview processes. So how to prepare for in-house interviews more generally, which I think we've covered a few points of, but there's another anonymous question just specifically about early stage interviews and navigating questions that are more kind of commercial and business based rather than legal, if you've only got experience in private practice. So Kandarp or Lisa, perhaps, could you offer some insights into how they could maybe prepare for those sorts of questions and what they should be thinking about?
So from my perspective, it's really just reading around the business. You know, there are so many articles out there in respect of Uber, for example, our various business models, the challenges that we've faced, not only in the UK, but around the world. And it's really just thinking through some of those issues and really having a good explanation as to why you want to join the organization, really having that enthusiasm and confidence, as Lisa said, as to why you'd like to be part of the Uber team, and what do you see as, you know, forward thinking from your perspective as to what the potential issues are for us going forward as well. So I would definitely read around the company. I would definitely align your motivations with regard to why you want to join and be ready to really explain that. I think that's really important.
I don't really have much to add other than what Kandarp has already said. I mean, it is as simple as, you know, if you have an interest in this particular industry, I mean, it should come naturally to you, hopefully, to read around it. And if you don't want to read around it, perhaps maybe that's time for you to reconsider why you're doing this interview. And if you should even be working at the particular job. So, I mean, I just ultimately, I think you never know where you're going to end up, but certainly I think you can control what interests you have because you know that's you. And so you will always come across as certainly more invested in the process if you have an interest around it. So perhaps that's just something to consider when you're making your selection.
Right, we've actually got quite an interesting question because we talked a lot about moving from private practice in-house. Emma, obviously you trained in-house and you've remained in-house, but we have a question for someone that's trained in-house. They've now moved into practice upon qualification. And they say they enjoy both, and there's pros and cons on each side. That they're asking, would you consider a candidate of this background? I think from my opinion as a recruiter, yeah, absolutely, you've got both experiences. I think it's just aligning yourself and deciding where you want to go. But Lisa and Kandarp, would you hire someone that is trained in-house, moved into practice and wants to come back in-house?
Yeah, do you want me to take that one first?
Oh, yes, Emma, yes, great,
yeah.
Thank you.
I'm glad you've come to me with this one. There's another one that I've eyed up as well, but I like this one as well. Definitely, the varied experience is really going to help those skill sets to embed. I think you would have to assess why the switch, especially at an early age, why early time in your career, early stage, why you've gone from in-house to private back, like what are your intentions with your career? Because I think that will be questioned whether it is expressly mentioned to you in the interview or not. You should be prepared to combat that up front. It's fine, it's cool if you've just decided and you've tried both and this is where you want to be, but maybe have a little bit more conviction around your career and where you want it to go and why you're doing that, first of all. But I think in terms of the role, as long as you can bring the skill set that the particular employer, the industry is looking for, and the culture is great for you and it works, and you can justify it more than, well, I want to do less hours again, or I want to, this, that, the other. You don't want that to come across automatically, which sometimes would be rightly or wrongly the presumption. So just be ready to combat those things. But I think the skill set, yes, why not? Of course.
Right, and there's quite a few more questions coming through, and there is a question around the SQE route, Emma. So I wasn't sure if you wanted to take that one as well. They've got 6 years experience of it's private practice, and how to leverage those skills or narrow their specialism to land an in-house job.
I'm currently training someone through the SQE, and they have QWE experience through private practice and in-house. So it's interesting that you've mentioned this. The 6 years is incredible. I think we should really be honing in on that and using it to your advantage. If it's 6 years purely in private practice, I think I'm
so.
gleaning from that question. Again, it's this adaptability. It's being able to switch and go into an in-house role and utilize it in the right way. There's so many studies and stats on this about how much money and time it takes to adapt somebody that has had a pure private practice background to be a successful in-house lawyer, and just, as all those things that Candop says, hitting the ground running, taking accountability, being able to run within the business and communicate in that way. You can definitely utilize the skills that you've gained through the QWE, of course, but it's justifying, it's showing and portraying that you have the adaptability to be able to take that 6 years into industry and be able to show the personality that will be required in that role.
Thanks, Emma. Hopefully that helps with that answer. The one question that's standing out for me at the moment, I think, is something that is hotly debated in the legal world, is around the right time to move in-house. And I think traditionally there was always a very strong opinion that you had to do your time in private practice, and you had to wait till you were 4-6 years qualified. From what I've seen, I think that attitude has changed, and obviously now we see people actually qualifying in-house like Emma and rising through the ranks of the in-house world. So I think, Georgie, we'll come to you for this one, in terms of that there is quite a long question around what is that sweet spot?
I think, to be honest, it's more dependent on you as a candidate than the clients. As I said earlier, we are seeing a real increase in the demand for, junior lawyers moving in-house at the sort of newly qualified level. So I would say that it's sort of how you want to work. If you want to move in-house and be close to the business and be dynamic, and if you eventually see yourself ending up as an in-house lawyer, the sooner you move in-house, you're going to be much more commercially minded and used to dealing with stakeholders and just able to deal with the challenges that it throws at you. So I definitely don't think you can be too junior to move in-house, and I think it's one of the real benefits of the SQE is that we're seeing lots of people who've actually qualified in-house and are doing really well, and we place lots of people who trained and qualified in-house. So I don't think you can be too junior, and I think we're seeing an increasing number of clients who will look at people who used to only look at sort of 4 PQE plus who are now considering NQs. So it's a really open market.
That's great. And what about being too senior?
I mean,
you've also done your time in private practice and obviously made your move slightly later than that kind of NQ level. So what are your thoughts on being too senior?
So from my perspective, I actually thought I was too senior, and I wish that I actually had gone earlier. And the reason why I say this is, completely being candid about my story and how I ended up moving in-house. I really found it a struggle to, I was around 5 years PQE, and I found it a struggle to get into a business that didn't want specifically what I was doing. So I wasn't a commercial lawyer. I was a corporate M&A lawyer, and trying to find that in the sort of industry, the place, and the right opportunity to fit my expertise, I found that really difficult. And so the adversity I came across and the challenge that I came across was I did a lot of interviews, probably did around 40 interviews, and I went to final round at least 9 times, of which only 2 of them I got an offer to. So my point is that I found it very hard to get into the in-house industry or the in-house market, because that I had to present myself. I wasn't that junior lawyer who could say that, hey, I'm malleable and I can adapt and don't worry, because, you are a bit more expensive than somebody who's a bit more junior. So it was a challenge that I faced. And so I ended up going into my previous role as a senior counsel, but in M&A, in corporate. So that ended up meaning that I had to wait, I can't remember however many months and however many interviews to find that right opportunity for me to get in. Now, had I done that maybe a few years beforehand, I think I would have been a little bit more open to more roles, because that people would have thought, well, actually, okay, that's fine. She's done that. She has the corporate experience, but hey, you know what? She could probably be malleable and we can adapt her to what we need in this particular role. I think I would have been just a little bit, face a little bit less adversity overall. I mean, no regrets, of course, but just generally, I would have gone in a little bit earlier.
So I couldn't agree more with what Lisa said. That just so resonates with me. I moved in-house around about 6-7 years PQE, and it almost happened by chance because I trained and qualified as a real estate lawyer, and there are very few in-house real estate roles, and I was sort of fairly blinkered in what I saw my career trajectory, etc. And and I have a somewhat unusual career path, and I don't know whether this is sort of an opportune time now to
I would love you to talk about how you've navigated that move from real estate into a much broader senior role that you're in now.
Sure. So I was originally at Baker McKenzie for a number of years, and getting to a point where it was either going for partnership or looking at or exploring alternative in-house roles, and a real difficulty with regard to looking at that. And I just felt that there needed to be a real pivot in my career. I wasn't really particularly satisfied as in respect to what I was, where I was, etc. And I took almost a bit of a leap of faith. There was a role being offered at DLA Piper to help start up their office in Qatar. And Qatar, I had to look it up when I was offered this. This is way back before you saw those Qatar Airways commercials back in 2008, 2009. And rather fortunately, I ended up going to Qatar at a period of time where it was a generational change. So Qatar for revenue stream, for people that don't know, is that it has the 3rd largest gas reserves in the world, and it basically has been setting up a number of gas pipelines or fields, etc. And all of that had literally come online, and so the indigenous population of 100,000 went from saw an incredible change with regard to their income levels, etc. And it was trying to project itself on the world stage. And so it was a really interesting experience being there, where effectively you are not only looking at it from a perspective of developing a new office, developing new client relationships, looking at a completely different legal system, but also within about 6 months of myself being there, there was a secondment opportunity in DLA seconded me to what was then a really formative real estate development company. But had been awarded $20 billion worth of projects to redevelop the downtown area. And the first thing I was almost immediately from day one involved in was putting in a bid for the World Cup. So it just really completely took off from there. When I joined that real estate development company, there was only one other in-house lawyer. It's like 100 people. Ultimately, it became about 500-600 people. Team grew to about 10 to 12 lawyers, and we were creating effectively a downtown area, effectively a city, which was just absolutely fascinating. But also, what was really interesting and what really captured my imagination was the innovation really put in. So this wasn't, this wasn't just an emulation of everything else that maybe Dubai or somewhere like this. This was really trying to innovate how you build a really sustainable city in the middle of a desert, and how you achieve that. And fast forward, you know, we're fortunate enough to have 2 children whilst we were there. And my wife decided, who's was a surgeon, now GP in the UK, said, I really would like to move back to the UK. I want to be able to continue, you know, with my ability to practice. I was just happened to be talking to a friend who at that moment in time moved back to Hong Kong and just joined a startup called Uber, and said, well, you know, I'm really thinking about moving back to the UK. You know, if you hear of anything, just let me know. And this was back in 2016, 2017, when Uber wasn't synonymous. And he said, well, have you ever thought about joining Uber? And I said, well, what's Uber? At that point in time, the general counsel had sort of this policy, which she was very open about, that it was harder to get into the Uber legal team than it was to get into Harvard Law School. So I think I went through 8 interviews and a written exam, and then the first thing you do, you all fly off at that moment in time to sit around the room and talk to Travis Kalanick, who is our then CEO. So. And this was a company that was just absolutely growing at tremendous pace. And what is really fascinating, what has been really interesting in respect to my experience at Uber, is that the opportunity to kind of expand your roles and really deep dive into other areas. So moving away from real estate to a much more commercial role, and then moving away from a commercial role to a much more sort of head of the UK role for a very significant business for Uber.
And that business would be a FTSE listed 100, wouldn't it?
If we were standalone in the
UK, standalone. I mean, it's just remarkable to go from you joined them as an unknown brand to now leading that team.
And it's really going from, you know, a real startup to a much more mature business that's gone through an IPO as well. So it's been a really fascinating journey. So I think my takeaways from all of that is really don't be afraid to take the road that potentially is, you know, less well traveled, and you know, don't be afraid to also take risks, and also massive pay cuts as well. I think when I joined Uber,
that's twice you said it.
I definitely took a massive pay cut.
Emma, Kandar's given a really good flavour there in terms of how he's moved from a real estate specialism into a commercial and then broadened out. You've worked for different industries and you've actually transferred across different sectors, and there is a question around actually how to do that. And I just wondered if you've got any tips and insights having done it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I've followed the culture of the company as opposed to the industry, and where I feel I would be happier, where the growth potential is, where it suits my lifestyle as well, and the people that I want to be around, what kind of work do I want to take on, what don't I want to take on, which is quite important as well. So rather than choosing by industry, which I did fall into at the start, you know, I wanted to be a sport lawyer and nothing else would do, and then you realize, well, you know, if you think about how many of them opportunities would be local to me, would I have to commute, everything that comes into the lifestyle of that, you start to have a little bit of reality. So rather than chasing the industry or the sector, for me it's been what would make me feel happy and more fulfilled, and then that just happens to be the ones that I've worked within. And you know, to be head of legal now at 5 years qualified with only having an in-house training contract that was 18 months, you'd say, you know, how would that be possible? I think if I would have chased maybe the larger household names or the industries that I thought would perceive success to others, I wouldn't be where I am today, because I wouldn't have thrived in an environment that I was trying to put myself within for the wrong reasons. So I've not really led from that, to be honest. I've looked at the job descriptions of people that I've met, what they would expect of me, and if I think I can deliver that and grow there. So that's why I guess that the variety looks the way it does on my CV. I'm not saying don't go for what you're interested in, be led by that, but personally I think there's another way of looking at it in terms of what are your priorities for your career. Of course, industry and interest has got to be up there, but for me there's some that are higher. So maybe have a look at what is right for you, order them in priority, and then see what you would need to reach for to get that for your own career.
That's really helpful. What do you think skill-wise has been most valuable for you in-house?
communication. And I was thinking about this earlier, everything that Candor said, everything that Lisa then added to that, what weaves throughout it all is communication. You know, we've said that we don't expect somebody to be the most technically able. You don't have to know everything about the business, just be inquisitive, show enthusiasm like you want to learn. But in order to portray all of these different things, you've got to be able to communicate. You are not in a room full of people that have the same specialism as you. I love being surrounded by others with different expertise. You know, chances are you're working within a small legal team, or at least at some point. I love learning about and being able to communicate with a marketing specialist, someone who's read like 5,000 books on sales and prospecting that I would never know about, but being able to communicate with them people is key. It's much more key than being able to know every legal intricacy of what would solve their problem at the time. You need to be able to understand what it is, put yourself in their shoes, show emotional intelligence. So just that communication, and of course, confidence, being bold, being able to manage tasks on your own, all flow into that. But the most important for me by far has been communication.
That's really helpful. And Lisa, I guess the other side of that communication piece, if we're looking at a lawyer's role, we've talked a lot about really understanding the business and being able to speak the business language. How do you think people listening can go and develop their kind of commercial acumen, their business acumen?
Good question. I don't know. It's probably the easy answer to that. I mean, developing, I think, an EQ, I think, as Emma said, I think actually that's probably more important than just a business acumen, because, you know, experience will ultimately come with time. You will develop it naturally. You're just enough, as she said, you know, yesterday, for example, I was in a strategy session and you are literally around a table with nobody else is like me, as in there's no other legal person. It's all somebody from everybody's from a different expertise and background, 20 people at a table. So you typically end up kind of surrounding yourself in an area where you have no choice but to get to that point where, you know, people come to you and you have to learn to, as Emma said, communicate with them. But I do think EQ is so important when it comes to just generally working, and I mean, I guess life, but specifically when it comes to having an understanding of the environment that you're in, and who is expecting what of you, and how you can assess that is so much more important than, I guess, dotting the I's and crossing the T's.
And that's one of the key differences between obviously private practice and in-house, and kind of where people are going to most enjoy themselves will depend on that kind of mindset. There are a lot more questions coming through. So if I just have a look, there is one about work-life balance. Again, this is a question we get asked a lot. Candor, what are your thoughts on, is in-house an easy ride?
I wouldn't say in-house is an easy ride, but there's definitely a work-life balance that we try to ensure. And it also just presents you with lots of different opportunities. So for example, Uber allows you to work anywhere in the world for 4 weeks per year. So which is just a fairly unique proposition. I don't know about law firms, but that was just a fairly unique position for us to take internally. Also, we have a very hybrid sort of working policy, so we're only required to be in the office 50% of the time, so it does give you a lot more flexibility as well. So it definitely comes with challenges. There's always an expectation that if there's something that needs to be done, that that the person will be have availability to be able to do it. But it would be, I think, unusual now for me, for example, to be working through weekends or late at nights, etc. So I'm hoping that the team think that we do have a work-life balance, and there are definitely advantages of being in-house.
I would just want to add to that. So I come from an M&A corporate background, so 110% it is better, especially if that's what you're coming from. That being said, is that I went in-house to, like I mentioned, a pretty creative tech, media, whatever it is, interaction, entertainment business. So people generally are more chilled, they're more relaxed, you can wear whatever you want, you can kind of flexibly work all you want. But if I were, for example, in a PE, if I were in a bank that did M&A, or if I were in a different type of business, then actually my hours probably wouldn't be too different. Like in a hedge fund, for example, my hours pretty much be the same as they were before. So again, I think that comes down to where it is that you want to get to. Similar to Emma saying, you know, look at your lifestyle you want / where you want to get to, your objectives in terms of your career. That all contributes, but then that will also contribute to your work-life balance as well.
For sure. Yeah. And just an extra addition to that, following in the footsteps of my panelists, I work 4 days a week, condensed hours from home. We also have a policy where we can work anywhere, as Candorp suggested, where we have an office for a certain amount of time per year. So it adds to that flexibility. That's something that I've always wanted to do and explore, was the 4-day week thing. And it actually really works for me, because I get to pursue other passions outside of that as well, which therefore makes me better and feel more relaxed in my role, to be honest, as a lawyer. So
And you
that's
have your
just the
blog, don't
reality.
you, in-house
Yeah.
Presser, that
Yeah.
you must spend some time doing outside, obviously, the core business hours.
Thanks, Georgia. Yeah, so I teach as well. I'm a visiting lecturer. I teach. I help aspiring in-house lawyers, just like the audience, to try and find their way in their own careers. You know, attend events, speak at events, things like that, and try and shape the modern legal world in a positive way. So, and that again, it keeps me interested, keeps me fired up, keeps me interested in the industry and want to keep going, and adds longevity to my career, if I'm completely honest. So you do get that from in-house. I don't think I would get that level of flexibility. I think I probably have difficulties just being on social media a lot more than I do now if I was to work in private practice. So you've got that element to it as well.
That's it. I'm conscious of time. We've only got 10 minutes left and we've got lots of questions, so we won't be able to get to all of them. There are a few around kind of actually advancing your career and that career progression not being as really clear as it is in private practice. So I think obviously you have PQE tied to salaries, you have quite a clear structure all the way up to partner. In-house, it is a little more around kind of developing up broader skill set, and there's not always the opportunity to move up. Candorp, any thoughts and advice in terms of how people can proactively manage their career in-house?
Sorry, I think really just if you're looking at for career progression in-house, then I think it's just really one, investing in yourself, you know, really understanding the business, really being able to be providing the necessary advice, really being part of the team, and really making yourself available for the bigger projects. You know, we have a fairly flat hierarchical structure. If people are interested in a particular area, so they really want to get involved in, then they're more than able to get involved in those as well. As you know, they may be a POC for a particular area to the business. So it's really just showing enthusiasm, willingness, and really wanting to be, you know, part of the wider organization.
As we look ahead into the kind of future of the legal industry, Emma, is there anything that you would advise lawyers listening today to kind of invest time in or prepare for in terms of where you see the industry going?
Mm-hmm. I think the legal world is your oyster at the moment. There's so much change and shift that is about to happen in terms of the typical role that you would see of an individual in-house. You know, you've got the ones that are quite obvious, that like the legal advisor / maybe compliance that we're moving towards a little bit more of, or like, of course, you've already got the company secretarial tasks, but what we're starting to look at now is legal ops, the introduction of AI. Are you a legal coder, or are you a non-coder but understands the law and is able to advise those people? You don't have to necessarily be interested in the hard IT techie part of it, but there is a lot of opportunities that will come out of it as a result of the shift that we're seeing. And of course, with QWE, it's so much more flexible now to explore what you're interested in and be able to determine that for yourself. There is some interesting research, and if you want to look it up, it's Richard Susskind's latest report on what the most common, I think he did it with Mark Cohen again, what the most common roles are going to be at the lawyer of the future. And these guys tend to get it quite spot on, to be honest. They predicted the rise of in-house and all this sort of thing. So have a look at those. It's really interesting. More on like the legal ops side and seeing how we can enhance efficiencies within in-house and also on the client side from the private practice point of view as well.
Thanks. And Lisa, how do you see, again, the future of the legal industry, and what advice would you give lawyers to prepare for that?
I am going to be of the opinion, probably given what I do now, that the legal lawyers are not just going to be lawyers anymore. I think that lawyers have so much more to give. I know stereotypically us lawyers are very much pigeonholed to be a specific kind of way. But, you know, as I've seen now with my sort of lifestyle business on the side, it very much to me seems like a way forward where we can flex our other muscles, whether it be creative, whether it be, you know, teaching, for example, whatever it may be. I think that all makes you, as Emma said, a better lawyer, because you are being introduced, exposed to other industries, other things outside of your work. And I will, not just lawyers, but just generally in careers, when people realize that actually your profession is one thing, your day-to-day is one thing, but look, you have the opportunity now in so many different ways and facets to be able to rise and do something else at the same time. And that shouldn't be a hindrance to your legal career. That should just help you actually excel or elevate in your legal career. You end up becoming just so much more well-informed, far more than just somebody sticking in legal, only doing what their sort of little box is. It just ends up becoming so much more rewarding. And then again, same thing with the balance as well. Like you get that balance of actually being, you know, fun and exciting and creative or whatever it is, and also getting that legal side. So I think we're in for a change in the legal world.
Yeah, hopefully an exciting one. And Candor, any additional thoughts to what Lisa and Emma have said in terms of the future of the legal industry and advice you give lawyers to prepare for that?
So I was thinking about this, and it makes me reflect on there's a blog post a couple of years ago by Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI, and he talks about really career progression, and a couple of things that really resonated with me, one of which he talked about compound yourself. You know, your career should actually have ideally have a compound effect as opposed to a linear effect. But the other thing, which I think is so important now, is that think about your career from a long-term perspective. Have a broad view of how different systems in the world are actually coming together at the moment. So, you know, a classic example at the moment would be AI, but there are a number of different systems. So who knew that Uber would be fairly successful, but really press a button and get a ride was true innovation at that moment in time. And then the last thing I'd probably end off with is, and this is one of the things he mentions in his blog post, is that think about your role in your next role as, if it's successful, it'll make the rest of your career look like a footnote.
I think that's a brilliant note to end on. Thank you, Candor. And we will actually share the resources that the panelists have mentioned today. So we'll find those, we'll send those out with the recording of the webinar. And I know we've got another kind of 15 plus questions to look through, which we can answer. I think Georgie will be able to answer some of those, particularly around the kind of salary information, about making the move in-house. We do have a salary guide we can share with everyone that's attended. And I'm sure the panelists will be happy to answer a few of those questions, and we can send that Q&A out to everyone that's registered for the webinar. Thank you so much, Candor, Emma and Lisa. I think we could talk for another hour about all your kind of career moves and your advice. There's so much to cover, but I think you've provided some really great insights, and I think there's, you know, so much opportunity for lawyers making that move in-house to advance their careers, not just in the traditional routes, and really developing those human skills with high EQ, the communication, but also having that business acumen, the resilience. Lisa talked about obviously all those applications you made to get that first move, and Candor about how, you know, you need to be resilient when you're in the business. And I think developing those human skills and being able to work with that pace and agility that you clearly all have experienced in-house, and making the moves between different sectors and different organizations. And Candor, it's really just being align to what they're trying to achieve in their career. So Emma, you spoke about almost like having that North Star of what are your values and what is important to you in making those moves. So I feel we've covered such an array of insights from both the private practice and training in-house side. So thank you all for sharing those, and thank you to everyone that's attended today. We will follow up with the reading materials that we've created with the webinar link and with some additional resources that have been mentioned. So thank you everyone, and have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.